I'm Megan Baker, and this is Influence Her. Dr. Kristie Bowers is the Associate Vice President and first female Director of Athletics at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being part of this discussion on Influence Her. First, the obvious. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience being the very first female Director of Athletics at RPI. What has that been like?
Incredible. I think it's been most memorable when I talk to our student athletes, and so our campus itself, being a STEM school, is predominantly attended by male students, and so 31% of our student population is female. And so to have a female in this leadership role for the 38% of my student athletes that are female identifying has been really rewarding. They've walked up to me and said some really kind things about visibility and being somebody that they can see. Many of them are engineers, so they're probably not going to pursue this as a career, but it means a lot to them. And then the parents, community members, people that have walked up to me and have just said, this is really cool. This is awesome to see you in this role with Division I hockey, Division III sports. I grew up in an era where there wasn't a ton of administrators that were female, and we're getting better. But it is really awesome to be a part of this community.
What is your first order of business, and what has been your first order of business? I mean, I'm sure it's been a very full year so far.
7 months has felt like a year, but in a good way. But it was really developing relationships. I kind of took a page out of Marty's book. So President Schmidt really, throughout the interview process, stressed with me the importance of developing those relationships, not only on campus, but in our community. One of the reasons I picked RPI was because of the people. So being able to develop those relationships and show up was really important to me. So I went to practices. I had them scheduled in my calendar so I could make sure I wasn't scheduling things on top of it and be really intentional, especially in the first month. I got to every single team's practice and was able to just be out there and watch our coaches and student athletes do the thing they love. And I think the other thing is getting that student athlete voice heard. We're in a really awesome time in our country where our young people are not afraid to speak up. And I think as a leader, you have to listen and you have to educate, right? They're not always going to be right. But I think taking that moment to explain the why behind why we're making a decision honors them, and it helps them grow and learn and then have your back in that decision.
Kristie, you were part of a panel discussion, Women in Sports and Careers, last month at the Albany Capitol Center. And it was right before Albany hosted Sweet 16 and Elite 8. Mm-hmm. What has that been like now that we have a championship game, South Carolina won? Yeah. What did this do for sports, for women in sports, specifically basketball?
I think having panels like that allow the connection between AAU and NCAA, right? And so we had a lot of young women that were in the stands. We had a couple amazing student athletes that were on the panel talking about their experience and talking about what does it take to get there. I think I'm sure as a mom who has kids, you think about your kids and what are their dreams and their aspirations. I know as a kid growing up, I aspired to be a Division I student athlete, but I didn't really know what it took to get there. And so I think having people be able to talk about it and say, hey, this is what my day looks like, this is what my week looks like, this is what the hours is that I'm putting in there. But watching a Caitlin Clark play live for our students, for our kids, seeing her walk down the streets of Albany, I think is just so memorable and so impactful for both girls and boys. And I love seeing the boys in Caitlin Clark shirts. I think those are things that are transcending. I think Steph Curry did it on the women's side. Yeah. He's been an incredible champion for women in basketball. Kobe did it as well. Both have girls, but now to see boys wearing Caitlin Clark shirts, I think is just awesome. Dawn was so great last night on the championship, being able to say thank you to Caitlin, because she has shouldered an incredible burden this year. Being that advocate for women's basketball, being a little edgy, being a little, I just think, her personality is not that kind and soft soul. She's competitive, and I think it has given women the right to be competitive and to say, it's okay to get frustrated with yourself and to hold yourself to a high standard. But she's an incredible teammate too, giving them high fives and helping that team get to the championship.
Let's dive into your journey.
Yeah.
Going back to when you were in school, playing sports, and really exactly how that helped to shape where you are today, especially being the first female athletic director at RPI.
Yeah, I will say that I don't think I was the most talented athletic human growing up, but I just had a passion and a strong affinity for details, and I was okay to work really hard. So, you know, my dad and my mom supported me in anything I wanted to do. I was a four-sport student athlete. There was really nothing that I didn't want to be a part of, and you know, and so in high school, I really could have picked basketball, could have picked soccer. I had some opportunities at Division III to play 3 sports, and I was kind of like, well, what do I want to do? What does this look like for me? And my journey to Binghamton was really about fit. It was really about what made me feel like I could thrive and excel. And Binghamton was an up-and-coming program. We had just started to Division I. It was the first full season of Division I my senior year. And so when they started to recruit me, they recruited me on a vision. They're, you know, you can come in and you can start and you can play, you can be impactful, you can get us to where we want to go. But it was more about the community. At the time, I had just come out to my parents, and the community around at Binghamton made me feel like I can thrive here. And that's important. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I want to do for all of our students at RPI, is that come as you are. Like, our hope is that we can, you know, embrace you, be able to help you develop, help you grow into that person that changes the world. But you feel safe, that you have that psychological safety to really enhance who you are and develop those strong core values to go out and change the world.
Let me ask you this. You know, when you're talking to younger students, as you just mentioned, and giving them an opportunity to thrive too, especially with RPI, what would you say to them? What words of advice would you offer them to perhaps even avoid burnout? Because it can happen. I mean, you were talking how you had like 4 different sports going on. I know my daughters are going between flag football and basketball, AAU, this, that, and the other thing. How do you balance it?
You know, I think because I did 4 sports, I actually balanced it better. Where I worry a little bit about some of our youth sports that are so zeroed in on one sport, and there isn't this cross-training. I think we're seeing a higher incident. We saw it with the NWSL and our women U.S. soccer team this year, more predisposition to knee injuries, and that some of it is, you know, that they're doing so much in one specific sport. So I worry about that a little bit. I think that helped my burnout to constantly be playing with different people, whether that was high school or AAU or travel soccer, or I kind of got a taste of a lot of different personalities I had to work with, and a lot of freshness from coaches, and different things that were going to challenge me in different ways. But I also think it's finding your passions outside. I opted to not do a traditional PE program. So my high school actually received a grant to do an outdoor education, physical education program. So I opted out of the sports, and I was like, yeah, let's do outdoor education, you know. And I think, you know, most athletes are like, no, I'll go to PE and I'll play sports because I'm good at it, and I don't really have to try. And I think being able to explore a different passion, be able to actually get exposed to the capital region. We came up here to the high peaks and hiked in high school was really rewarding for me. It's created a lifelong passion for camping, which my wife despises, but she's happy to support once a year to go. But I think things like that help refresh you. We say to our students all the time, like, find a second hobby, find a passion, find something to get connected with campus. And I think Division III allows that flexibility where our students have a shorter off season, and they can, you know, be a president of a club, they can study abroad, they can do things that are co-educational. We just talked about it with D3 Weeks, celebrating that story of not just being a student athlete, but what else do you do on campus that we can kind of talk about in research and labs, things like that. So.
Let's talk about developing student athletes. I mean, that is one of the roles as director of athletics there. What advice can you offer, you know, in that realm too, when someone's maybe looking at a college, like what should they be looking at holistically, I guess? Yeah,
I think, you know, asking really tough questions and making sure that the experience is what you want, right? So if you want to be an Olympian, you're probably going to want someplace that's going to talk about academics and athletics, right? That's what you need to be focused on, is that degree and, you know, fine-tuning your sport. But if you have career aspirations, that institution should talk about what does it look like in that career. What are the connections that they're going to offer for you to alumni to help you further your career? And then I think, we're in a day and age with, modern sports where I'm really concerned about sport performance and wellness and making sure that our students sleep and they eat and they do all the things to take care of themselves. So an initiative we had this year, we worked with Sodexo, our partner on campus, and they donated a chocolate milk station for our student athletes. And it's a step, right? It's that, how do I get them fuel right after a lift or right after practice, while they're on their way to the dining hall or have to run to class, or, I know fueling is really important. And I think if you're talking to a coach or talking to a director of athletics and they don't mention things about wellness, you just have to be aware, is that the environment you want to be in? I oftentimes talk to our students and ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And so I'm not just focused on this 4 years, but how do I help you for the next 40 years?
You have a PhD in community and public affairs. So let's talk about overachievers maybe from Binghamton. Why was that important to you personally?
I think, I have always used sport, going back to your question, I've always used sport as a vehicle, right? So I was good at sport. I used it as a vehicle to get an opportunity at Binghamton, was afforded a scholarship, and then I used sport as a vehicle to get my master's degree. So I went down to Western Carolina University and was a GA for them and taught in the PE department and was able to work with the soccer team there. And so when I came back to Binghamton to coach, I was like, well, sport's going to do this again. So I knew I wanted to talk about sport in a way that I think doesn't get a lot of attention. We hear a lot about the competition, we hear a lot about the money, but my research was really on what does sport do for students and how does it help develop a student that is more globally aware as a leader coming out of college than the average human. And really it's about the interactions. I know I see my students daily, right? And our coaches see our students, and those feedback loops, those check-ins, those opportunities to say, hey, listen, this wasn't good enough, but this was awesome, is so important to development of emerging adults. And I just wanted to be able to articulate that, because I think people who are not in our industry don't always know what we do. My family still doesn't really, my immediate family gets it, but my extended family isn't really sure what I do. So being able to articulate that in a research setting so that campuses can further the conversation about how important this co-educational between athletics and academics in higher education is at a time where the narrative is pretty negative, and pretty much, really shifting towards these students as pros, which I don't think is the direction to go. These 18 to 22-year-olds need this co-educational environment to continue to develop those leadership skills, and then also to have individuals who are looking out for their development as a global leader rather than it being a business.
Talking about that, and what's been really controversial is NIL. So, what are your thoughts on that for college sports?
I'm fully supportive of it. I grew up, again, when I was a student athlete, you couldn't write a book, you couldn't produce your own music, you couldn't, there were so many restrictions. I couldn't run a camp about my ability to teach somebody to be a goalkeeper, right? And I couldn't put my name on it. And I think those restrictions were silly. They were nothing we needed to do. So I think name, image, and likeness in its heart of being able to allow students to be entrepreneurs, just like students on campus or any human, is great. I will say our students don't have time to be entrepreneurs, but if they did, game on, go ahead. But, I think where we have seen some challenges have been, we have some passionate fan bases who, want to secure the best and most talented students for their team, and will go to any lengths to be able to do that. And that's where I think name, image, and likeness has turned from what the inherent heart was of allow these students to be entrepreneurs just like every other student, to this other human influencing an 18 to 22-year-old that's not yet ready to make these big time decisions. And so I worry about that. I think we are trying at an NCAA level to evolve and to ask for help in certain ways to make these regulations safe for our students. I think Charlie Baker is throwing out ideas and saying, hey, let's think about it. Right. Let's reimagine it. Let's not do the same thing. And I think it's good. It's good to have these dialogues and discussions to say, okay, but how can we do it? Not let's not do it, right? Don't shy away from it, but how do we do it in a way that protects our student athletes so they can see these contracts, right? They're not a behind the door situation. You know, the first name, image, and likeness contract that came out, a student got caught in an in perpetuity contract. And I just remember reading the articles about it and being like, this is an 18 to 22-year-old. They didn't know enough to read that contract to understand that forever this company now owns their name, image, and likeness. And it's bad on that company for even suggesting it. But at the same time, it's a company, it's a business. And so how do we as educators, how do we as leaders in higher education ensure that our student athletes have protection around them and education around them to make the best decisions? So NIL is not inherently bad. It's unfortunate that there's people around it that are influencing it.
And like anything else.
Yeah.
Right?
Unfortunately. Unfortunately. Yeah.
Final question for you. Where do you see women's sports in the next 3 years? I mean, we've made remarkable progress, but still more needs to be done.
Yeah, I think we need to continue to have male champions, right? I love the female networks that we're all building, but I will say that some of the best individuals in my career have been male champions. So the director of athletics at BU, you know, he was instrumental in me getting this position at RPI, and I think there's so many men who are in really amazing places in the world and in these spaces to really have generational wealth to help influence women's athletics, that we need their help, right? And I think 3 to 5 years from now, I think the sky's the limit, because I think people are realizing how awesome women's sports are and how...
It's about time.
Yeah, I know. Well, and the personalities. I feel like it's finally the day and age where women feel comfortable being themselves. You know, I think for far too long there were a lot of gender roles to it, and I think about Caitlin Clark, and her tenacity defines a bit of a gender role that we typically see, and so for that to be overwhelmingly welcomed is just tremendous.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I appreciate it, Dr. Kristie Bowers. She's the Associate VP and first female athletic director at RPI. Thank you for joining us on Influence Her.
I appreciate it.
Thanks.